The sun didn't rise over Hill 402. It just bled through a thick haze of dust and spent propellant. It was 6 o'clock, the magic hour, but there was nothing magical about the way the light caught the grit in my teeth. I sat on the edge of a jagged foxhole, the cold weight of my M4 resting across my knees. The suppressor wrap was charred black, smelling like burnt hair and industrial chemicals. I ran a gloved thumb over the Trigicon ACOG. The glass was cracked, but the chevrons still glowed a faint, defiant red. Inside my head, the world was a dull, underwater hum. That RPG from the previous night had left a permanent high-pitched whine, a persistent E-flat that drowned out the morning birds. I watched Doc Elias's lips move a few yards away, but I couldn't hear a damn word he was saying. I just watched his hands. They were trembling. He was trying to organize his kit, but his fingers were fumbling with the zippers. The red cross on his bag was so faded it looked like a ghost, a pink reminder of a Geneva Convention that didn't apply out here in the dirt. "Ammo count," I grunted. My own voice sounded like it was coming from a mile away. Doc looked up, his eyes bloodshot and sunken so deep they looked like bruises. He held up 3 fingers. 3 mags. That was it. I checked my own plate carrier. For full, 1 partial. We were sitting on a pile of empty brass that clinked like wind chimes every time we shifted our weight. We were the remnant, the leftovers of a Bravo company that had been chewed up and spat out by the meat grinder of the last 48 hours. We'd been told to hold the high ground. We'd been told the QRF, the Quick Reaction Force, was spooling up their birds, that the Apaches would be overhead before the dew dried. We believed it. You have to believe something when you're down to your last tourniquet and a handful of 5.56. The air was eerily still. No birds, no wind, just the distant, rhythmic thud-thud-thud of heavy artillery, softening up some other unlucky bastard's tin mics to the north. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee that tasted like CLP and battery acid. It was the last of the water. "They're coming, Viper," Doc said, his voice finally breaking through the tinnitus like a radio signal fading in. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the tree line 500 meters down the slope. "The birds. They'll be here." I didn't answer. I just adjusted the Punisher patch on my shoulder, feeling the Velcro scratch against the multicam. I looked at the grid coordinates, sketched in grease pencil on my forearm. We were the anvil. We were the rock the wave was supposed to break against. I checked my watch. 6:30. The morning light was getting sharper, cutting through the ashen desperation of the valley below. Everything was gray, olive, and dead. I reached over and tapped the side of my helmet, making sure the record light on the lead cam was off. "Not yet. Check your sectors," I ordered, sliding the selector switch from safe to semi. The metallic click was the only honest thing left in this world. If it moves, it's a target. We hold the perimeter until the radio sings. We sat there in silence, 2 ghosts in waiting, watching the fog roll off the killing fields, waiting for the QRF that was supposed to save us and the storm that was definitely going to find us. The sun hung low, a bloated orange ball suffocating in a sky of charcoal smoke. By 1700 hours, the magic hour had turned into something foul. The shadows stretched out across the valley floor like long, reaching fingers, reclaiming the territory we'd bled to hold. I checked the PRC 152 radio for the 100th time. The screen was a mocking, backlit green, displaying the same static-choked frequency. "Hi side, this is Bravo 16. Requesting sitrep on that QRF. Over. Nothing. Just the relentless, biting hiss of white noise. No solid copy. No 5 mics out. No heartbeat of a rotary wing cutting through the soup. The silence was heavier than the plates in my carrier. It was the kind of silence that tells you you've already been erased from the chalkboard. Doc was slumped against the sandbags, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He'd lost his helmet somewhere in the afternoon scramble, and his hair was matted with a mixture of sweat and fine, gray moon dust. He looked like a man who had already seen his own wake. "Viper," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Radio's dead, isn't it?" I didn't look at him. I couldn't. "Atmospherics?" I lied, the word tasting like copper. "The ridge is blocking the bounce." They're coming. Document, keep your eyes on the tree line. Then the world shifted. The first human wave didn't come with a scream. It came with a low, rhythmic thrumming of boots on hard-packed earth. Then came the whistle's sharp, piercing shrieks that sliced through the tinnitus ringing in my skull. They emerged from the tree line like a swarm of locusts, dark silhouettes against the dying light. Contact! Front! I roared, the adrenaline dumping into my system like a shot of liquid fire. My M4 barked, the recoil punching into my shoulder with a familiar, violent rhythm. Pop, 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 pop. I watched the rounds impact, puffs of dust from coats, the sudden collapse of bodies in the tall grass. Beside me, Doc's sidearm was snapping a desperate, rhythmic punctuation to my rifle fire. The enemy didn't use tactics. They didn't use cover. They just ran. It was a mass of meat and screaming steel, a human wave designed to drown us in sheer numbers. The ashen desperation of the landscape was suddenly lit by the jagged, strobe light flashes of muzzle flares. Every shot I took felt like I was trying to bail out a sinking boat with a thimble. The thud, thud, thud of the distant artillery had stopped. Now, the only percussion was the mechanical clack-clack of my bolt locking back on an empty chamber. Reloading, I yelled, dropping the empty mag into the dirt. My hands were steady, a byproduct of muscle memory and a brain that had switched over to pure survival logic. I slammed a fresh mag home and hit the bolt release. Chak-chick. The smell hit me then. The suffocating stench of cordite, ozone, and the metallic tang of fresh blood. The fog of war wasn't just a metaphor. It was a physical weight, a thick, swirling mist of gun smoke that made every shadow look like a bayonet. They reached the wire. 50 meters. 40. I could see the sweat on their faces, the crazed intensity in their eyes. We were no longer soldiers. We were just two men at the mouth of the cave, fighting off the dark. I keyed the hand mic one last time, screaming over the roar of the rifles. Broken Arrow. I say again, Broken Arrow. Bravo is being overrun. How copy? The only answer was a burst of jagged static. The radio wasn't just silent. It was dead. And as the first of them cleared the berm, I realized the QRF wasn't diverted. They weren't coming at all. We were the sacrifice, and the gods were hungry. Midnight brought no relief, only a shift in the spectrum. The world turned a grainy, neon green through the lens of my PVS 14s. The fog of war was now a literal shroud of white phosphorus and smoke hanging heavy in the stagnant air. Every movement was a ghost. Every shadow was a threat. The perimeter had collapsed. We'd been pushed back from the foxholes into the guts of the primary bunker, a concrete tomb that smelled of damp earth and old fear. The enemy wasn't a wave anymore. They were flood. They were in the trenches, the sounds of their breathing and the wet schlick of blades finding flesh echoing off the narrow walls. Viper! Left! Left! Doc screamed. I spun, the weight of my kit pulling at my spine. A shadow lunged over the sandbags. I didn't have time to bring the M4 to low ready. I jammed the muzzle into the shadow's chest and pulled the trigger. The suppressor muffled the blast to a dull thwack-thwack, but the impact sent a spray of hot, dark liquid across my goggles. I wiped them with a frantic, muddy glove, desperate to see. It was hand-to-hand now. Primitive. Brutal. I felt a weight slam into my back, knocking the wind from my lungs in a raspy, wet heave. I dropped the rifle, the sling catching on my neck, and reached for the K-bar on my chest. The world narrowed down to the 6 inches of steel in my hand. I felt the vibration of the blade through the hilt as it found resistance, the sickeningly soft give of an abdomen, then the hard stop of a rib. The man above me made a sound like a leaking tire. I push him off, my chest heaving, the tinnitus in my ears reaching a deafening, crystalline shriek. Doc, report. I choked out. I found him in the corner of the bunker, hunched over a body that wasn't moving. He wasn't even using his weapon. He was swinging an empty canteen like a club, his face a mask of primal, shaking rage. His hands, those steady, surgical hands, were clawing at the air. They won't stop, Viper. They just keep coming. I grabbed him by the plate carrier and hauled him back toward the rear aperture. The mechanical percussion of the night had changed. The distant artillery was back, but the rhythm was different. The thuds were walking closer. They were bracketed. I looked at the map taped to the bunker wall, then at the dead radio. A cold, oily realization slid down my throat, more bitter than the cordite. We weren't holding the hill for a rescue. We were the anvil. In the strategic manual, an anvil doesn't move. It stays still so the hammer can strike it. We were the bait, the concentrated point of contact meant to draw the entire enemy regiment into a single localized grid square. The meat grinder wasn't for them. It was for us. "We're it, Doc," I whispered, though he couldn't hear me over the roar of a fresh squad of shadows hitting the trench line. "We're the X on the map." I kicked a fallen AK toward Doc and grabbed my M4, slamming a fresh mag into the well. My last mag. The metal was hot enough to blister my skin through the gloves. We stood back to back in the center of that concrete box, the green-on-black world flickering with every muzzle flash, waiting for the hammer to fall. 3 o'clock. The world had gone quiet, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the dead hour, that hollow space between the last scream and the first light where the soul starts to leak out of the body. The air in the bunker was thick enough to chew, a toxic cocktail of burnt powder, copper, and the sweet, rotting stench of intestinal wounds. I sat against the cold concrete, my legs stretched out over a carpet of spent brass. The high-pitched whine in my ears had settled into a dull, pulsing throb. I reached up with a trembling hand and fumbled for the lead cam on the side of my ops core. A small beep and a steady red light flickered in the corner of my vision. "My name is Staff Sergeant Viper Miller," I whispered, my voice a dry rattle. I looked into the lens, seeing only a distorted reflection of my own hollowed-out face. "Bravo 1-6. If you're watching this, it means the anvil held. It means the hammer fell." In the corner, Doc Elias was slumped over. He wasn't shaking anymore. He looked peaceful, his head tilted back against a stack of empty ammo cans. His medical bag lay open between his boots, its contents spilled out like the guts of a dead animal. Empty wrappers, used needles, and the last roll of tape. He had a hole in his side the size of a fist. He tried to plug it himself with his own field dressing, but his hands had finally failed him. He bled out quietly while I was watching the rear aperture, his life soaking into the dust of Hill 402 without a sound. "Doc's gone," I said to the camera, my throat tightening. He was the best of us. He kept waiting for the birds. Tell his mother. Tell her he didn't feel anything. Tell her he was a hero. I looked down at the last magazine in my hand. It felt light. Too light. I thumbed the rounds. 5, maybe 6. I turned the camera toward the bunker slit. Outside, the valley was a graveyard of shadows. Hundreds of them, piled up in the wire, a testament to the night's butcher work. They were out there, regrouping in the dark, waiting for the sun to give them the signal to finish us. "We weren't forgotten," I muttered, more to myself than the recorder. We were spent, like currency. Someone back at HQ traded Bravo for a tactical advantage. I hope it was worth the price. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crumpled photograph, the edges singed. I didn't look at it. I couldn't bear to see their faces. Not now, not here. I just tucked it behind the strike plate of my carrier, right over my heart. The mechanical percussion started again. Not the enemy's boots, but a low, distant whistle from the sky. The heavy ordnance was being dialed in. The coordinates I'd bled to hold were now the target for a flight of B-52s or a battery of MRs. They were going to glass this entire ridge. "I'm going to turn the light off now," I said, reaching for the camera. "If you find this, just remember we stood our ground. Bravo didn't break." I clicked the camera off. The red light died. I leaned my head back against the concrete and closed my eyes, listening to the sound of the wind beginning to howl through the trenches, waiting for the 5 o'clock rush. One last stand. One last mag. 5 o'clock. The horizon didn't glow. It burned. A thin, jagged line of bruised purple and sickly yellow began to peel back the night. revealing the true scale of the carnage. The valley floor was carpeted in the fallen, a sea of gray-green fabric and unmoving limbs. The ashen desperation had reached its peak. I stood up. My joints screamed, popping like dry kindling. I felt heavy, not just from the kit, but from the sheer atmospheric pressure of the end. I stepped over Doc's cold legs, giving his shoulder one last squeeze. "See you at the RP, brother," I whispered. I walked out of the bunker and into the raw, biting air. The tinnitus had reached a fever pitch, a silver needle piercing my brain, but beneath it, I heard the sound. A low, rhythmic thrumming. Not the QRF, not rescue. It was the sound of 1,000 boots hitting the dirt simultaneously. The final rush began. They came out of the tree-line in a solid wall of silhouettes, silhouetted against the rising sun. No whistles this time, no screaming, just the terrifying, mechanical intent of an army that knew the defenders were spent. I raised the M4. The cracked ACOG was useless in the glare, so I looked over the top of the optic. Thud, thud, thud. The ground began to vibrate. It wasn't the enemy. It was the hammer. The air started to ionize, the smell of ozone overriding the stench of the dead. I keyed my radio. I didn't care who was listening. I didn't care if the encryption was blown. "All stations, this is Bravo 1-6, I said, my voice steady, almost calm. "Targeting grid Charlie 9 or 4. Impact on my position. Execute Broken Arrow." I say again, execute Broken Arrow. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I fired my last 5 rounds into the mass of the charging wave. Pop, 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 pop. The bolt locked back with a dry, metallic clink. I let the rifle drop, the sling catching it, and pull my sidearm. I had 1 mag left for the Beretta. The first of them hit the berm, their bayonets gleaming in the dawn light. I saw the whites of the lead man's eyes, the frantic, desperate hunger of a survivor. I leveled the pistol and squeezed the trigger until the slide locked back. Then the sky fell. The sound was beyond noise. It was a physical blow that crushed the air out of my lungs. A wall of white, blinding heat roared up from the base of the hill, traveling faster than the speed of thought. The world turned into broken glass, a shattered mosaic of fire and dust. I felt myself being lifted, the Punisher patch on my shoulder searing against my skin. For a split second, the tinnitus stopped. There was only the roar of the sun descending to earth. The camera, thrown from my helmet by the force of the initial blast, tumbled through the air. It hit the dirt, skidding through the gray ash, its lens cracked and pitted. It settled in the dust, the lens facing the spot where the bunker had been. There was no bunker. There was no Bravo. There was only a crater and the rising sun, shining through the settling dust of a world that had moved on. The camera flickered once, a ghost of a circuit trying to stay alive, then the screen went black. The anvil had held. The hammer had fallen.
This concludes today's entry in the War Tape Files. History is written in the records we leave behind. To help us preserve more of these stories, subscribe and join our archive. Thank you for watching.